So Big Bertha was damaged, so they decided to rebuild or build a new car. The V8 road-going Vauxhall Ventura was dropped from the range because of the fuel crisis at the time, similar to the pandemic we're in at the moment. And they took the engine, the gearbox, the rear axle, the brake, suspension, and they put it all into the Firenza, which was now going to be Vauxhall's sort of main, biggest selling unit of models they had. And obviously, because the remainder had come out of Big Bertha, they called it Baby Bertha, which is the car that Ian's drawing now that you can see on screen. So the car debuted in 1975, and this picture is actually a very famous picture that was used on the front cover of Autosport from the 1975 British Grand Prix at Silverstone. Back then, we didn't have just the sort of Formula 2 and Porsche 911s and Formula 3 support races at the Grand Prix. You'd have all manner of races. And that year at 75 at Silverstone, the super-saloons, which was the championship the cars raced in, was supporting the Grand Prix. So it was one of those races. It was the race of the year for the super-saloons, for Vauxhall, for DTV, and also my dad. And Dad qualified. I think actually qualified second or third. He didn't qualify on pole, but he won the race by I think it was by 40 seconds. And the Autosport used the picture on the front cover, but then the headline of the race report was Marshall's Super Bore, because unfortunately he decided it was such an important race that he drove quite carefully and as fast as he could, whereas normally he was quite sort of flamboyant and quite sideways, which I think that picture is one of the few from the race where he is actually sideways.
So just so everybody knows, so your father, well, yeah, is Gerry Marshall, and he was a legendary touring car racer.
For my sins, yes. Yeah, so my late father was Gerry Marshall. He started racing in the early 60s and raced all the way up until he passed away in 2005. Most famously known for saloon cars and especially Vauxhalls, and to a degree, this particular car, the Vauxhall Firenza, called Baby Bertha. So this was raced by DTV and Dad in 1975, 76 and 77. From 78, DTV decided to concentrate on rallying, so the racing stopped. But Dad raced this car around 60 times and won, I think there was only 4 that he didn't win. So won over 50 races, several championships. And the car was sold in 77 and went through various hands and changed colour. And eventually my dad bought it back in 1984 and raced it a few times in the what was then Wendy Wall's Championship before selling it to a guy called Joe Ward. Joe's had the car since 85 and had it restored to what it looked like in period. And for those of you that follow sort of things like Goodwood and classic saloon car racing, Joe still races Baby Bertha to this day. And it's a very famous car, and a lot of people instantly recognise it as Vauxhall, as DTV, and as Gerry Marshall.
Yeah, and at Goodwood we have there is the Gerry Marshall Trophy, as well, isn't it?
Yes. So over the sort of few years since Goodwood has been up and running again, Dad competed at the Festival of Speed several times in Baby Bertha in this car. But also in the main revival meeting, he won the St Mary's Trophy for 60 saloon cars several times. Also took part in the TT and a couple of other races. And when Goodwood decided to in 2014 to redo the members meeting, they approached me and said, "Look, we want to do a Group 1 saloon car race, so saloon cars from the 70s and very early 80s." And as your dad was the sort of most well-known of these drivers, we'd like to name the race after your father and call it the Gerry Marshall Trophy, which was a great honour. And to be honest, once Goodwood asked, I couldn't really say no. As Dad's son, it's a great honour. As Marshall family, I've got 2 older sisters. It's a great honour for us. And my late father, if he was still with us, he would be very honoured by it. And yeah, it's a fantastic event. Yeah, the whole members meeting's a fantastic event. But the Gerry Marshall Trophy each year has gone from strength to strength. So much so that this year we were actually supposed to have 60 Group 1 cars in the Gerry Marshall Trophy. And I was actually invited to drive my own Vauxhall Firenza this year after competing last couple of years in a Vauxhall Viva and a 43. So it's a great shame that with the current lockdown and the pandemic that we're all going through, that Goodwood, the 78th members meeting this year, unfortunately has been postponed until next year. But next year, the Gerry Marshall Trophy will still be there, and it will be 60 Group 1 cars, and will be the highlight of the event, hopefully.
I mean, it sounds amazing. It sounds like, so. I mean, I don't really know, because it is. Yeah, I mean, and the other thing, if people aren't aware, is that in the Kentagon at Brands Hatch, there's a very large photo of your father on the wall as well in Kentagon, because he won there many times.
Yes. So overall, Dad won 625 races, but he won more races at Brands Hatch than anyone else. And when Dr. Palmer, Jonathan Palmer, was starting off in motor racing in the late 70s, he started off in club motor racing. He said to me that the first race he would always go and watch would be my dad. It's fantastic. Yeah, fantastic.
So hopefully got that iconic shape, but it's going to it's looking forward to doing this one. So there you go. There's the start of the car. So, anyways, sorry.
Yeah, so Jonathan Palmer was a great fan of Dad's, and again, when Dad passed away, Jonathan approached me and said, "Look, we'd like to do something for Brands Hatch to remember your father." And as Ian said, in the Kensington, the main bar at Brands Hatch, I would say it's a life-size picture of Dad, but it's bigger than life-size.
It's huge, yeah.
Holding up a pint glass, and they've also got the same picture in the Halewoods bar, just on the outside of the circuit as you go down Paddock Hill Bend on the run up to Druids. And Jonathan, as I say, is a great supporter of Dad. When they celebrated the Snetterton anniversary a couple of years ago, they've also put a picture of Dad racing his Mini from 1963 at Snetterton up in the bar there. And again, I think Dad's won more races at Snetterton than anyone else. But it's lovely when you have comments from people like from Jonathan Palmer and from Lord March saying, when they were kids or younger, they would always follow Dad's race, and they were huge fans of his. It's quite humbling to a degree when people that big in British motorsport are that interested and that invested in someone.
I mean, we met, I think, a couple of years, it was a good few years ago now. It must be 2009, I reckon. I was doing some work for Chevrolet, because obviously Chevrolet was then a GM brand, and Vauxhall were Chevrolet, and I think it was at Brands that you were there, and we started to chat and talk, about it. So I mean, you've absolutely grown up with motorsports. So how, take us right back to to the beginning. How did it become you knew that your father was such a kind of iconic figure in the motorsport scene?
Yeah, I mean, I've grown up in it, definitely. The first race I went to, I was about 6 months old. And I suppose in some ways, for me, Dad wasn't iconic because he was just my dad. Yeah. But I definitely noticed there was more of an interest in him than most people. So I was quite lucky that every weekend I would go racing with Dad, and Dad would race pretty much every weekend of the year. I mean, in the 60s, 70s, 80s, Dad would be doing 65, 70 races a year. So you can imagine that would be sometimes multiple races at the same event, or racing at different circuits over the course of a weekend. So we'd go racing. It'd always be quite a similar story. We'd get to the track. I'd hang around with Dad until qualifying started, and Dad would say to me, "Well, where are you going to go and watch from?" And I'd say where I'm going to go and watch from. And then his first lap round, he'd always give me away when he saw me. Then after qualifying, we'd meet up with him, and we'd then decide what we're doing for lunch, and meet up with his friends for lunch wherever. And then when it came to the race again, he'd say, "Where are you going to watch from?" And he'd always make sure, at least on the first lap and probably most laps during the race, he would look out for me and give me a wave. Just to make sure I got takes. I mean, I started going racing. I'd be be pretty much on my own from like 6, 7 years old watching. And I think I was quite lucky that most people knew who I was. So I never got into any trouble. I'm sure people were probably keeping an eye on me as well. So yeah, definitely grew up in it. And Dad was also a car trader as well. So we always had nice cars at home, race cars at home, or at Dad's businesses. And I, to a degree, took motor racing and cars for granted growing up because it was second nature.
Yeah.
But it was growing up, it was fantastic. For me, being a young boy and a young man, watching your father racing fast cars and enjoying himself in the bar afterwards, and telling tall tales and winning races, it was fantastic, and something I always aspired to do myself, and do a little bit, but not nowhere near to the level of my dad.
But to me, this is like one of the most iconic images. Just that real kind of tail out, really kind of like you can see the oversteer, and it's an amazing shot to do anyway.
Yeah, I mean it's an iconic picture of Dad, and it is one that people would immediately think of him for. It was an incredibly fast car, and it suited Dad's driving style. With 500, well, slightly less than 500 horsepower underneath the right foot. And it did need to be driven with a bit of a sort of hand around the back of the neck, and to get the best out of Baby Bertha. Especially back then, because the tyre technology was different, brake technology was different to what we're used to now. But the funny thing is that most people always think of my dad as being sideways and flamboyant, which he was, but he was only like that when he knew that he was going to win a race. If he had to really, if he was really going fast and really trying, he was very neat and tidy. But it was only when he knew he was going to win that he would be flamboyant. Because one of the things, or a couple of things, Dad realised very early on is motor racing wouldn't be where it is today without the spectators and without the marshals. And if we haven't got spectators that want to pay to go and watch the racing, then there's no point us racing. And if we haven't got the marshals there to help. Help run the races and to help resolve any mishaps there might be, then again we couldn't race. So Dad was very conscious of the fact that spectators and fans and marshals need to be entertained, and Baby Bertha was a perfect tool for him to be like that. I mean, there's a very famous story that a lot of people tell, and they tell it in slightly different ways because it's probably grown a little bit. There was a particular race that Dad was driving Baby Bertha, and he was leading by pretty much a lap, and he came into the pits, got out of Baby Bertha, went to the back of the car, kicked the tyre, got back in, and off he went, and still won the race. Now, some people would say he might have been sort of taking the mickey a little bit or showboating, but Dad was doing it to he wanted to try and entertain people, and it's fantastic that something like Baby Bertha, such an iconic car, is still around today. And owned by somebody like Joe Ward, who was a fantastic custodian of the car, and really wants to keep it how it was in period, and keep racing there as well, because it's important that at the end of the day, a race car is built for racing. Now, I know we get to a stage where we say race cars are too valuable to race. Well, they're not. If it can be made and it's broken, it can be fixed. So my opinion, and my dad was the same. Race cars should be there to be raced. And to be enjoyed, as long as it's safe to do so, then we should still enjoy them and race them.
So in terms of your kind of growing up with it and with the family and being so what are some of your kind of highlights from it? Because obviously you've done a bit of racing yourself, and you've got which one have you got?
So I did have after Dad passed away, I still owned his another famous car of his called Old Nail. Which unfortunately I had to sell a couple of years ago. But I've actually got a Vauxhall Firenza Drupney, which is a road-going version of a Vauxhall, which is basically a 2.3 1970 saloon car, which I race in Group 1 touring cars. But from a highlights perspective, from my own racing, just getting your license, highlight to begin with. I was also very lucky that with my dad, his with the British Motorsport, you can have what they call VIP numbers, and Dad's race license number was 55, which was one of his lucky numbers. And when Dad passed away, I wrote to what was then the MSA and now British Motorsport, and said, look, please can I have a race license that's got the number 55 in it? I appreciate you can't give me Dad's number. And they actually wrote back to me and they gave me Dad's license number. So I'm very lucky to have race license number 55, which sometimes causes an issue because when I go and sign on for a motor race and they look at my number, they go, that number doesn't look right. Because most licenses are sort of 6-7 digits long.
So in terms of like in terms of circuits or events that you put your favourite, what if you're racing, what circuit is your personal favourite? That's the first question, Nick. What circuit would you be like, right, that's my favourite track to be on?
I think my favourite track to be on, because it's just such an iconic place and I actually really enjoy it, is Goodwood. I've driven most of the, if not all the circuits in the UK, but Goodwood is it's incredible. The circuit that hasn't changed since it's been opened from a layout perspective. What you see is what you get. It's very fast. So you've got to have confidence in yourself, in the car, and your fellow competitors. So Goodwood, from a driving perspective, I just absolutely love. Somewhere like Snetterton, I love as well, just because it's not stepping back in time, but it's it's fantastic. But then somewhere like Silverstone Brands actually got so many memories. So to be honest, I love all the circuits for different reasons. There isn't a circuit that I don't like. But from a driving perspective, definitely in the UK would be Goodwood. From a global perspective, I've been to Spa a few times for the classic events there. And my dad loved the old Spa, and he did. He drove the new Spa as well, and I'd love to race at Spa. Yeah, exactly. I mean, growing up, we used to in the UK we used to have a race at Snetterton every year called the Will Hire 24-hour race, which ran from 1980 to I think about 95, which was a 24-hour race for saloon cars in production spec. And Dad obviously did that a number of times. The first 3 years he finished runners up, but that was an incredible event, and I absolutely used to love that. Growing up, it was fantastic. We used to have a great crowd, and it was like a mini Le Mans because there was a big fairground, there was campsites, there was all sorts of things going on, which I'm sure you can imagine with drunk middle-aged men, and it was fantastic. And but I did see the flip side. I remember, I think it was 84, Dad was sharing with David Sears and Roger Clark. David Sears is Sir Jack Sears' son, and unfortunately he crashed the car they were sharing before Dad got to drive it, and before Roger Clark got to drive it, and before it was actually just after I got there as well. So the race ended very early, but it did mean there was sort of about 23 hours of solid drinking after that, though.
So not all bad. Not everything was lost then.
From a race perspective, I mean, Dad took part in 1,340 races, and out of those, he won 625. So, I would say out of those races Dad did, he probably drove, I would say probably about 400, maybe 500 cars. Because for Vauxhall, you had the different Vivas, then the Firenzas, the Magnums. Dad raced Capris, Escorts, Sierra Cosworths, Minis, Aston Martins. So a good couple of hundred cars that he raced. If you were to ask me what his favourite car was, I would struggle to say exactly what his favourite. I'd say his favourite car that he raced, that he was successful in, was probably Old Nail, which is one of the other cars that I've asked you to play. Because that's the only race car Dad actually kept. Up until the day he passed away, he still owned Old Nail and had owned Old Nail for 30 years, and before that raced it for sort of 10 years. So I'd say that was definitely his favourite car. But his sort of dream car, I mean, again on YouTube there's a great clip of Dad from Silverstone, from a VSCC meeting, where Nick Mason, the drummer from Pink Floyd, very kindly let Dad drive his BRM Formula One car from the 50s. And again, that was a car that was driven in period by Pampas Bull Fraulein Gonzalez. So it's a car that my dad had always lusted after and always dreamed of driving. And getting to drive it at Silverstone, and Nick saying to him, look, just go for it. It's a fantastic. If you get a chance, it's a fantastic video, and I definitely recommend anyone out there to watch it. And you know, if you read any of the comments, people will say, you know, that this is how a BRM should be driven. But yeah, from a car perspective, yeah, Dad had lots of favourites, and to be honest, I'm the same. You know, I've got lots of cars that I love. Yeah, I've just got the one race car and one road car at the moment, but it depends how the day takes you. You know, if I drive for work, well, I travel to meetings with work, and you know, I just want something comfortable, economical. You know, I don't want a Porsche 911 or a Ferrari Testarossa. I just want something comfortable and economical as my day-to-day drive. But yeah, it's lovely to have something more sporty when the opportunity arises, but it's not always practical, unfortunately. And then from a race car perspective, yeah, there's so many race cars that I'd love to own, and yeah, the same with my dad. And I'm sure there were cars that he would have loved to have driven. And one of the guys that Dad really looked up to, and one of his other regrets was not doing NASCAR. And he absolutely loved Richard Petty, or as he's known in NASCAR, the King. You know, the day that Dad passed away, he was actually driving one of Richard Petty's old cars. And the only reason he was driving it was because, you know, he loved Richard Petty and he'd always wanted to drive a NASCAR. So I'm sure there was countless other cars that he didn't get to drive that he would have loved to.
It is 326.
326.
326. But do you want me to put the number 55 on it as well?
If you could, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah. We'll do it. 3, 2.
I suppose someone like yourself, Ian, you know, that you get to see so many beautiful, you know, road cars, race cars. You know, you can't just paint everything because of the time and you know, and the investment it takes for you to do so. So you know, I hope I've helped you a little bit as well.
I'll put the 55 just down here as well. So that is
cool.
That is. I like that one. That's a good one. I'm happy. You know, so when I'm happy with it, I have a little smile on my face, and I've done. So there we are. There it is. You see that?
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, that's absolutely brilliant, Ian.
And there's 55
yeah, I love
down there as well. So
yeah.
So that will be in the book. Cheers,
Take
buddy.
care.
I'll see you later. Bye.
Cheers.